A very warm welcome to our esteemed viewers. Welcome to the last edition of Newspaper Headlines for the week, coming to you live on the Advent Cable Network Nigeria Television. We'll be looking at some national dailies this morning with stories making the rounds within and around the world. I am Rachel Igbunu. I'll start with the Vanguard newspaper and I'll take it from the lead story on insecurity. NIN SIM linkage will help us track crooks. This is coming from Buhari. And the kickers adds it will cover our security structure, help identify crooks, determine success of war against insecurity. No adequate satellite to monitor bandits, says National Space Agency DG. And countering it, satellite engineers disagree. The story is on page 5. And we have this picture of a FACA parent jubilate. It has some of the parents of the adopted students of the Federal College of Forestry Mechanization, AFACA, Kaduna, rejoice at the school premises after their children regained freedom from kidnappers in Kaduna yesterday. You can see the excitement on their faces. And beside the picture on page 3, NECO releases 2020 SSCE results for external candidates. Emefiele vows to resist maize importation, urges youths to embrace agric. The story is still on that page 3. Coming down below the picture, we have this picture again of President Muhammadu Buhari and Minister of Communications and Digital Economy, Dr. Isa Pantami, during the launching of the National Policy for the Promotion of Indigenous Content in the Nigerian telecommunications sector and revised National Digital Identity Policy for SIM card registration at the Presidential Villa, Abuja. This happened yesterday. And on page 9, gunmen abduct Abia Varsity students, number unknown. The kickers, 2 policemen killed, station burnt down in Anambra. Another police station attacked in Ebonyi, policeman killed. The last kicker, DPO's office, admin building set ablaze. We move up above the masthead. We are working to get abducted Greenfield Varsity students free. This is coming from Sheikh Gumi, and the story is on page 8. And a sad one on page 6. Buhari, Baja, governors, others mourn as Adeboye's son dies at 42. May his soul rest in peace. And now to the last story on page 15. CBN extends Naira $4 scheme indefinitely. That is all for Vanguard newspaper. We move to Daily Sun newspaper, and I'll take it beside the masthead. Expect abducted Greenfield Varsity students back home soon. Gumi. Story is on page 8. Now the lead story on banditry. Heavy security deployment in Abuja. The kickers. Operatives drafted to schools, border towns, varsity, poly, others short. The picture we have here is that of President Muhammadu Buhari, 5th right, with Chief of Staff Ibrahim Gambari, 4th left. SGF Boss Mustafa, 5th right, 5th left. Minister of Communications and Digital Economy, Isa Ali Pantami, 4th right. Chairman NCC Adeolu Akonde, 3rd right. The Executive Vice Chairman NCC Umar Ambata, 2nd right. The MD Galazi Backbone Muhammad Abubakar, DG Nimsi Aliyu Abduraziz, DG NITA Inua Abdullahi, and MD Nicomsat Abimbola Alele. during the launch of the National Policy for the Promotion of Indigenous Content in the Nigerian Telecommunications Sector and revised National Digital Identity Policy for SIM card registration in Abuja. This happened yesterday. Now, beside the picture on page 6, Save Nigeria from Disintegration, Wike begs nationalists and the elites. Tension in Abia, Imo as gunmen abduct varsity students. The kicker, Kalu describes action as devastating and evil. Gunmen kill 3 policemen. Raise stations in Anambra and Ebonyi. The story can be found on pages 4 and 26. On page 25 now, federal government suspends Bala Usman, names Koko, assistant MPA MD. How Adeboye's 42-year-old son died. Federal government suspends Bala Usman, names Koko, the acting MPA MD, and the story is on page 25. How Adeboye's 42-year-old son died. The kicker, Buhari, PFN, governors, Kalu condole with Redeemed Church GO. Residents desert streets over military shootings in Imo community. They are plotting to exterminate Igbo youths, group alleges. That's on page 26. And below the picture, expect greater floods. Federal government warns. Expect greater floods. Federal government warns. Says 121 local governments in 28 states at risk. NEMA calls for efficient use of dams to curtail menace. The story can be found on page 7. And now to the last story on Daily Sun newspaper is on page 2. CBN extends Naira for dollar scheme indefinitely. That's all from this paper. We move to the Authority newspaper. Commiserates with Pastor Adeboye on death of son. On that same page, Father Mbaka has desecrated the holy altar of God, Bishop Onaga. Nigeria's Folake Olowo Foyeku, South Africa's Mahezi, Gray's Glow-sponsored African Voices. See details on page 5. And on that same page, NECO releases 2020 SSC results for external candidates. Now to the lead story. Inside Nigeria's killing field. That is what is tagged. Gunmen abduct Abia Varsity students, others in Imo. The kickers, Boko Haram may mount flag in Aso Rock, Part Tome, coming from Part Tome. And National Assembly promises sufficient funds to tackle insecurity. Sultan of Sokoto alarmed, calls for prayers. And moving to this picture from left to right, Mr. Shuaibu, the Zonal Controller, Kano Nigerian Communications Commission, NCC, Dr. Suleiman Garba, Special Assistant Technical to the EVC, Mr. Usman, Director, Human Capital and Administration, Professor Umar Garba Dambata, Executive Vice Chairman and CEO, NCC, and His Royal Highness Nasiru Ado Bayero, Emir of Bichi, and others during a condolence visit to the Emir of Bichi in Kano recently. Beside that story, we are in talks with abductors for release of Greenfield Varsity students. This is coming from Sheikh Gumi and the story can be found on page 22. Now, the bottom strip stories. Some Nigerians know bandits. Some Nigerians know bandits' hideouts, nefarious activities, but feign ignorant. Coming from the Minister of Interior, Aregbesola, and the story can be found on page 21. On page 6, NNPC begins rehabilitation of $1.5 billion Port Harcourt refinery. Page 6. A last story here on page 22. Buhari would have rescued Leah Sharibu from Boko Haram's den if she were Muslim, says Christian Forum. See details on page 22. We move to Blueprint newspaper. I'll take it below the masthead. Nigeria's unity should not be compromised. This is coming from Oshibajo, and the story can be found on page 5. On that same page, Governor Ishaku didn't order arrest, detention of 14 youths. This is coming from the Taraba government. On page 24, federal government suffers $470 million investment loss to 11 marginal fields licenses revocation. See details on page 24. Now, on the lead story, amid service chief's assurance, gunmen kill 2 police inspectors, abduct Abia Varsity students. The kickers, negotiations ongoing for release of Greenfield students. This is coming from Sheikh Gumi. Abducted Kogi Council boss regains freedom. See that story on page 21. Senate restates need for supplementary budget. And South Korea ready to assist Nigeria, coming from Envoy. And the stories can be found on page 6. And below the pictures, NIN registration will curb insecurity. This is coming from Buhari. And the kicker says, don't take deadline extension for granted. NCC warns. The story starts from the front page and continues on page 6. On page 24, stock market closes lower, shares 167 billion naira. The bottom strip stories on page 22. Yoruba group raises the alarm over plot to attack security agents. Buhari, PFN, Taraba governor, others commiserate with Adeboye over son's death. See story on pages 31 and 32. And the last story here on Blueprint newspaper on page 14. Abuja schools save, FCTA assures. That ends it on Blueprint newspaper. We now move to Nigeria News Direct. I'll take it from the lead story. Presidency probes NPA. Suspends Hadiza Bala Usman as MD. Appoints Koko acting MD. Now to the picture to my left is that of His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari and Minister of Communications and Digital Economy, Dr. Isa Ali Ibrahim Pantami, at the launch of the National Policy for the Promotion of Indigenous Content in the Nigerian Telecommunications Sector and revised National Digital Identity Policy for SIM card registration at State House, Abuja. And the picture to my right is that of the Lagos State Governor, Mr. Babajide Sanwo-Olu. Middle. Next to him is Onisobo of Igbobi, Sabo, and Yaba Kingdom, Oba Olabi Adeniji. Commissioner for Education, Mrs. Folashade, second right. Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Education, Mrs. Abosede, right. Special Advisor to the Governor on Education, Barrister Tokumbo, left. and Chairman, Lagos State Universal Basic Education Board, SUBEB, Honorable Wahab Alowute King, second left, with students during the commissioning of schools as part of the state schools infrastructure projects on Thursday, May 6, 2021. Now, above the masthead, death of Pastor Adeboye's son. We are shaken but confident, coming from RCCG. The story is on page 22. On page 3, NCC warns telecom consumers on dangers of pre-registered SIM cards. And the last story here on Nigerian News Direct, Harris Oil and Gas announces Shell's Osoyode as CEO. See details on page 2. All right, right about now, we pause to observe a short break. When we return, we shall continue with the New Telegraph newspaper. Please stay tuned.
When one is horrible, it means that there is nothing that is objectively good and progressive that will come out of such individual.
If you have been convicted of an offense before and you have been pardoned, and anybody is trying to bring that up against you and calling you a convict, you have the power to sue that person for defamation.
Justice must not only be done, but it must be seen by all to have been manifestly done.
Every citizen has a right and every citizen has an obligation.
That a plea of ultra-virus acquit or convict is very different from the plea of pardon.
Trespass is that act that interferes with the peaceful,
no matter how minute
this right, no matter how minute.
He who comes to equity must come with clean hands.
Thank you for staying tuned. We now look at the rest of the papers and stories from the world of sport. We continue with New Telegraph newspaper. I'll take it above the masthead. End SARS protest. Underwriters to pay 4.5 billion naira claims. The story starts from the front page. It continues on page 6. And on page 25, CBN extends Naira for dollar scheme indefinitely. Below the masthead, linking SIM to name will enhance security aid planning, coming from Buhari. The story is on page 4. Senate keep mum after 4 hours meeting with service chiefs. We are satisfied with briefing, coming from the spokesman. And the story is on page 5. Buhari, Jonathan, governors, Kalu condole with Adeboye over son's death. See story on page 3 and 7. And on page 3, Catholic Church suspends Father Mbaka for 30 days. The kicker, priest accuses church leadership of holding him hostage for 2 days. And now to the lead story. Students' abduction. Bandits targeting government. Coming from Sheikh Gumi. Says they are working to secure release of Greenfield Varsity. The varsity students panic as government abduct ABSU scholars. Incident devastating and evil, coming from Kalu. The story can be found on pages 3, 7 and 27. Now beside the picture, WHO, vaccine supply crunch adds to risks of COVID-19 resurgence. See the story on page 26. And on page 5, federal government suspends NPAMD. That is on page 5. Below the picture, federal government inches closer to new national airline. Picks preferred partner. The kicker, Nigeria to save $117 million from maintenance plan. The details on page 4. Now the last story on New Telegraph newspaper on page 7. Exercise aids cognitive development of preterm. That's on page 7. We move to Nigerian Tribune newspaper now, and I'll take it from the lead story. Reps probe 43 billion naira safe school initiative. The kickers, Abia government confirms abduction of varsity students on Okigwe-Uturu Highway. Rehabilitate our children. Parents of 27 released students appeal to federal government. And federal government orders tight security at borders. The details on pages 3, 4, and 27. Now, beside the picture, Buhari suspends NPA MD Hadiza Bala Usman. See details on page 6. On page 26, no training of 3,000 Fulani men in Ondo Army Barracks coming from Akerodolu. Or you're set to give final judgment on boundary dispute in 23 local government areas. See the details on page 3. And on page 29, 28 states at risk of severe flooding. This is coming from the federal government. We have this picture from left chairman, First Bank of Nigeria Limited, Group Managing Director, and others during the scheduled visit of the newly appointed chairman to the leadership of the First Bank of Nigeria Holdings Group at the head office in Lagos. This happened on Wednesday. And the second picture is that of the commissioning of block of classrooms by the Lagos State Governor. Now to the last story here on insecurity. That's the bottom strip stories. Defense budget not adequate, coming from the Senate President. And the kicker says, as service chiefs hold closed session with Senate. See details on page 3. We move now the story above the masthead. Buhari, governors, others mourn as Adeboye loses 42-year-old son. The details on page 5. The last story now on Nigerian Tribune newspaper. Reps probe reports on $348 billion illicit financial flow. Loss of public funds. Invite Finance Minister, NNPC, CBN, EFCC, NFIU. See details on page 29. That is all for Nigerian Tribune newspaper. Next is Business Day newspaper, and I'll take it from the lead story. Rich nations stockpiling critical minerals Nigeria has ignored. Rich nations stockpiling critical mineral Nigeria has ignored. The story starts from the front page, continues on page 31. Beside the lead story, Eco Atlantic, Ikoyi, Lekki, still most profitable investment locations, as average house price jumps 76% in 4 months. The story starts from the front page, it continues on page 31. Now the last story, an insight story. Digitization to spur growth, but poor internet speed might see Nigeria missing out. Digitization to spur growth, but poor internet speed might see Nigeria missing out. Our story is on page 30. Now done with the front pages. we move to sport on Vanguard Sport on pages 30, 31 and the back page. We start with that on page 30. Man City stirs to pocket £1 million each if they win Champions League final. And Mahrez battles Kante, Havertz for Champions League award. Hazard can't stay a minute more in Madrid. Spain reacts to Pali Chelsea return. Barca plot free transfer to link up Aguero with Messi. And Istanbul to keep Champions League final despite 2 English teams. Tuchel asks Chelsea to sign PSG's Maguire's. And the last story on this page, page 30. Mount takes a swipe at Kroos after he said Chelsea had not players to keep him awake at night. After he said Chelsea had no players to keep him awake at night. Now page 31. 16 athletes jet out to USA for relay qualifiers. Super Falcons to feature in Glamour Summer Series in USA. And match fixing. 2 Nigerian referees banned for taking bribe. Genk. We are yet to receive right offer for Onuachu. Fatai Osho. Fatigue got the better of Eimba against Ifeanyi Uba. Osimhen gets clearance for must-win Spezia clash. Sports Resort partners Malaga Academy to train Nigerian coaches. As the last story on this page 31, we move to the back page of Vanguard Sports. Super Eagles starts World Cup qualifiers in September. And Falcons to feature in Glamour Summer Series in USA. The last story here, Iheanacho should stick with Leicester, coming from Dane. That's the story here. We move to today's fixtures on EPL. Leicester versus Newcastle comes up 8 p.m. on La Liga. Real Sociedad versus Elche comes up 8 p.m. And on Bundesliga, Stuttgart versus Augsburg, 7:30 p.m. League One, Lens. That is all on Sports Update this morning. And that is the much we can bring to you on this edition of Newspaper Headlines. Thank you for allowing us grace your TV screens. As we go into the weekend, I pray that God's mercy will speak for us all in Jesus' name. Amen. Remain blessed and have a wonderful weekend.
Beaming from the nation's capital, we bring to you the good news through various programming, news updates, worship and teachings.
The paralysis of sin makes us to be separated from God.
Contact us for your live streaming solutions and event coverage such as synods, conferences, seminars, revivals and lots more. Engage us in showcasing your brands and services to the world through adverts and sponsorship.